only person I just believe that Ilia would, without a doubt, fight is Islam. Doesn't matter what Islam does outside of a fight with him. When that fight will be brought to the table, he'll always go back and revisit that, because that's the biggest fight, and a fight between him and Islam is much bigger than the fight between him and any of those other guys. So while the guys are speaking fact in terms of fight the number one contender, you're not necessarily thinking about the champion side, where the champion at times should go, hey, there's some reservation.
Ilia could knock heavyweights out. We've seen that. He can knock anyone out when he touches them. I think Ilia versus Islam is the biggest fight the UFC can make, hands down, in my opinion. You've got two-weight world champions. One will try to go for greatness and be the first triple champ of all time. So it's an absolutely gigantic fight. Like, you cannot beat around the bush. You have to just state the obvious and understand it. However, I don't know if the UFC want to do that, because then you slow down two divisions. But is it worth it? If they're going to get the money in return and the business is there and the people want to see it, the UFC will do it. So it's an interesting topic. I don't believe they're going to do it right now. I think when you've got the likes of Sarukian and Paddy and Gaethje, they need to have that belt competed at lightweight, and Ilia needs to defend that belt. Islam just won the belt and has to fight a welterweight. Do you know what I mean? That's the way I look at it. But it absolutely is the biggest fight in the sport you could make right now. Way bigger than anything to do with John Jones and Aspinall and Pereira, in my opinion.
From the moment Ilia Topuria opened his mouth, the entire MMA world felt the ground shift. His words weren't trash talk, and they weren't hype. They were a declaration, a direct shot at Islam Makhachev that instantly transformed a fantasy matchup into the sport's most urgent, unavoidable super fight. What followed was chaos, psychological warfare played out in real time, weight class debates tearing fan bases apart, UFC executives hesitating as two divisions threatened to freeze, and analysts scrambling to decide whether Ilia was reckless or simply fearless. One comment lit the fuse, and suddenly every podcast, every headline, every fighter interview revolved around a single question: is Islam truly untouchable, or is Ilia the one man willing to walk straight into the fire? The tension climbed, the noise grew louder, and the rivalry took on a life of its own. But this rivalry started long before anyone realized. Ilia Topuria didn't whisper his challenge, he launched it like a grenade. In front of cameras, microphones, and millions of fans, he openly questioned Islam Makhachev's most sacred asset, his wrestling. Ilia claimed that any champion who needed an entire camp just to prepare for grappling was already showing weakness. It wasn't just an insult, it was a direct strike at the foundation of Dagestani dominance. And he didn't stop there. Ilia doubled down, telling Islam to come to Georgia if he wanted to learn what real toughness looked like, framing himself as the fighter forged by chaos, not routine. The MMA world exploded. Fighters, analysts, coaches, everyone had an opinion. Some called Ilia bold, others called him delusional. But one thing was clear, he had everyone's attention. Joe Rogan had long painted Islam's camp as a monastic pressure cooker environment. No nightlife, no distractions, no shortcuts. A factory of champions built through obsession and discipline. Ilia's comments clashed violently with that mythology. He wasn't pretending to be a warrior monk. He was the lone wolf calling out an empire, suggesting he saw cracks in a system the MMA world had treated as untouchable. In a single moment, Ilia flipped the narrative. Islam wasn't the invincible machine anymore. He was a champion under fire, being hunted by someone who genuinely believed he could expose him. But things got even more heated when weight suddenly entered the conversation. The moment the idea of Ilia versus Islam hit the public, the next argument erupted instantly. What weight would this even happen at? Analysts, fighters, and fans split into two camps. Some insisted the super fight only made sense at lightweight, where both men have proven dominance. Others argued the UFC would inevitably push for welterweight, bigger spectacle, bigger money, bigger stakes. But beneath the excitement lay a cold, technical truth, moving this fight to 170 tilts the entire battlefield in Islam's favor. Islam isn't the tallest welterweight, and he doesn't have the longest reach. But those details don't matter. What matters is his frame. Every analyst who has rolled with him, trained with him, or fought someone from that camp says the same thing: Islam's torso and back are built differently. When he's on top, it feels like gravity doubles. His pressure doesn't come from size alone, it comes from density leverage and technique honed through decades inside a grappling furnace. At 170, that advantage becomes overwhelming. Ilia, for all his explosive power, simply isn't built like a natural welterweight. He can knock out anyone at featherweight and hurt anyone at lightweight, but against true 170-pounders, he'd be giving up height, reach, and raw bulk. The concern isn't his skill, it's the physics of surviving Islam's smothering top game for 5 rounds. Even Ilia's biggest supporters admit the same thing. At 170, Islam becomes a mountain. Yet Ilia's mind games were only beginning. If the physical matchup sparked debate, the psychological one poured gasoline on it. Unlike JDM, who stayed calm and barely spoke during fight week, Ilia Topuria came out swinging with words sharp enough to cut steel. He didn't wait for the UFC to book anything. He didn't wait for rankings or timing. He went straight after Islam publicly and repeatedly because he understood something JDM never did: staying silent gets you forgotten. But poking the bear keeps your name glued to the champions. Every comment Ilia made was calculated, calling out Islam's wrestling, mocking his move to 170, challenging him to come to Georgia for real toughness, suggesting Islam was already showing cracks. None of it was random. This was strategic chaos, and it was working. Michael Bisping spelled it out perfectly. This wasn't fear. This was marketing. Ilia wasn't trying to win an argument, he was trying to secure a future payday and make himself impossible to ignore. And the more he spoke, the more noise he created across the entire MMA landscape. Ilia knew exactly who he was provoking. Not just Islam, but Dagestan fans, Khabib loyalists, Ali Abdelaziz, Javier Mendez, and every fighter molded by the mountain culture he was challenging. He targeted the camp with the strongest collective identity in MMA because rattling them rattles Islam by extension. It was psychological warfare at the elite level, the kind that creates super fights long before contracts are signed. But the Dagestan side didn't stay quiet. The moment Ilia's comments started circulating, the Dagestan camp fired back with precision. Javier Mendez, the architect behind both Khabib and Islam, dismissed the idea that Islam was boring as pure nonsense. He pointed to the numbers: 19 minutes of control at Madison Square Garden, and reminded everyone that Islam didn't just win at welterweight, he delivered one of the most dominant performances the division had ever seen. There was nothing boring about suffocating a top contender from bell to bell. To Mendez, Ilia wasn't speaking truth. He was stirring the pot. Then came Ali Abdelaziz, never one to hold back. He accused Ilia of copying the Conor playbook, chasing attention online instead of building a real legacy. Ali argued Islam had defended his belt multiple times, while Ilia hadn't defended his once. To him, the idea that Islam should drop everything to fight a lighter champion made no sense. Islam had nothing to gain, no rankings boost, no legacy benefit, no competitive logic. If anything, beating Ilia would be viewed like beating a smaller man, barely a win, but a massive risk. And behind every argument loomed Khabib's shadow. The standard, the measuring stick, the aura. Anyone challenging Islam indirectly challenges the entire Dagestani system, a culture of discipline that has shaped champions for over a decade. Ilia wasn't just poking Islam, he was poking the mountain itself. Still, the matchup refuses to die because fans know what it really represents. Behind the noise, the UFC finds itself trapped in a dilemma that becomes bigger every day. Ilia versus Islam isn't just another fight, it's a super fight so massive it would freeze 2 entire divisions the moment it gets booked. Matchmakers know it, executives know it. Even Dana White, for all his bravado, knows launching this matchup too early creates a traffic jam with real consequences. At lightweight, contenders like Arman Tsarukyan, Justin Gaethje, Paddy Pimblett, and others are all circling the belt waiting for their shot. Islam stepping out for a super fight instantly puts their dreams on hold. Meanwhile, featherweight is equally stacked. Ilia has a line of hungry challengers fighters the UFC needs to keep active to maintain momentum in a rapidly growing division. This creates the toughest balancing act in MMA: enormous financial upside versus competitive fairness. The business case is undeniable. Ilia versus Islam could headline a stadium, break records, and anchor a blockbuster event. Even the rumor of placing this fight on the historic White House card sent fans into a frenzy. But the operational cost is steep. Booking the fight too soon stalls momentum, delays rankings, progression, and risks creating logjams the UFC has spent years trying to avoid. It becomes a question of timing, optics, and opportunity. Do you sacrifice an entire year of 2 divisions for one mega fight, or do you let both champions defend, risking the matchup losing heat, and yet Ilia keeps climbing, making the debate impossible to ignore? While fans obsess over Ilia versus Islam, both champions are staring down their own gauntlets, and one wrong step could erase the super fight entirely. At featherweight, Ilia's path is anything but clear. Arman Tsarukyan's stock is rising fast. Paddy Pimblett has momentum and star power the UFC would love to capitalize on. Justin Gaethje, with his explosive style, remains a looming wildcard. Every one of these contenders brings danger, and Ilia still hasn't defended his belt even once. One slip, one miscalculation, and the dream matchup evaporates overnight. Islam's road isn't smoother, it's arguably even harsher. The welterweight division is a minefield filled with monsters. Michael Morales just knocked out Sean Brady and sits undefeated at 19-0. Carlos Prates ended Leon Edwards' reign in brutal fashion. Shavkat Rakhmonov is a wrecking machine who mauls everyone he touches. Ian Gary is undefeated, loud-hungry, and demands his shot. And Kamaru Usman still lurks as a dangerous veteran with championship experience. The reality is brutal. Both Ilia and Islam need to stay perfect for this super fight to remain as massive as it is right now. One upset, one off night, one bad stylistic matchup, and the entire hype train derails. The UFC knows it. The fighters know it. Fans know it. That's why timing is everything. Strike too early and the divisions stall. Wait too long and someone else crashes the party. The clock is always ticking. But the community is deeply split on whether Ilia could actually win. No matter how loud the trash talk gets, everything eventually circles back to the same burning question: can Ilia Topuria actually beat Islam? Makhachev analysts have broken this matchup down from every angle, and the debate refuses to settle. On the feet, Ilia brings something Islam has rarely faced at the highest level: relentless pressure, crisp accuracy, and knockout power that lands with surgical precision. He doesn't waste strikes, he doesn't hesitate, and every shot he throws carries real consequence. His killer instinct is so sharp that one opening could flip the entire fight in an instant. But once the fight hits the mat, the tone changes dramatically. Islam's grappling is a different universe altogether. His top control isn't just technical, it's suffocating. Fighters describe it like drowning on dry land, a pressure that drains willpower one breath at a time. Islam stays calm, composed, and methodical even under fire. He doesn't need chaos to win. He creates a slow, inevitable avalanche that buries opponents over 25 minutes. This clash of styles is exactly why the MMA world is obsessed. It's not striker versus grappler, it's control versus explosion, patience versus violent structure versus instinct. Add in whispers that the UFC wants this fight headlining the historic White House card, and suddenly the stakes skyrocket into territory MMA has never seen before. If this showdown happens on that stage, it won't be just another title fight, it will be a statement etched into the sport's history. Which leads to the final truth, the one both sides quietly admit. For Ilia Topuria, this isn't some promotional trick or short-term call-out. He treats the Islam fight like destiny, an inevitable collision he was born to chase. No matter who Islam fights next or what weight he holds, Ilia always circles back to the same target. To him, Islam is the mountain he must climb to cement his legacy, and Ilia is convinced he can plant his flag at the very top. On the other side, Islam may deny it publicly, but even he knows there's no escaping a fight this massive. The money alone is impossible to ignore. The legacy stakes are even bigger, and as public pressure grows, the narrative tightens around him. A true champion must eventually face the storm head-on. As more analysts declare this the biggest matchup in MMA today, bigger than Jones versus Aspinall, bigger than Pereira versus anyone, the inevitability becomes even clearer. Then there's the history factor, a potential triple champ storyline. It's something the UFC has never had, something no fighter has ever done. That alone makes the fight too monumental to leave on the shelf. And all it took was one small, almost casual line from Dana White, one tiny hint that sent shockwaves through the entire sport. Suddenly fans were split, debates erupted, analysts rushed to take positions, and the MMA world shifted overnight. This isn't fantasy anymore. It's a countdown, a slow march toward a fight that will eventually have nowhere left to run. But the final question changes everything. Ilia versus Islam stands at the crossroads of everything fans crave: skill, tension, legacy, and the promise of something the sport has never seen before. One man rises through explosive chaos, the other through suffocating control. One chases destiny, the other defends an empire. And somewhere in the middle, the UFC must decide whether to unleash the biggest fight in modern MMA. So the final question remains: is Islam truly too dominant to fall? Or is Ilia the one nightmare he can't avoid forever? Drop your predictions below, because nobody knows how this ends, only that it's coming.